right. Yeah. Welcome, everyone. Thank you again for being here. Just want to very, very briefly talk about what's going to occur over the next 5 weeks or so. So you should have on your way in picked up some material. One of the documents I was going to speak from is Path to TEP. It's something that we looked at the last meeting. Diving into that a little bit, the first phase of that is getting to the draft TEP. That's between now and the end of March. The primary activities that will be occurring during that period of time will be your meeting here today and a similar meeting next Thursday, where which is the bulk of the agenda here, to solicit your comments and questions and concerns about the draft TEP. And then the CCTA board meeting, or the CCTA board, will meet 3 times in March to deliberate on what they've heard so far, and the goal is at the end of March we will put out our draft, what we'll call our draft TEP, for formal circulation and comment. Other information, or the information that we'll use during those 3 meetings, will be the comments that we hear from you. We also expect we'll be getting comments from our regional transportation committee meetings. We may be getting comments from the public, et cetera. So we'll use all the comments that we collect, and we'll talk more about the comments. And then also during March, we'll be conducting a public opinion poll. So we'll be using the results of that, and that poll will be based off of the draft expenditure plan that you first saw earlier this week. And then the third piece of information that we'll use, we at the last meeting we talked a little bit about, or actually I guess we didn't talk about it at the last meeting, but we're going to be performing a performance analysis of the draft plan, again looking at effects on greenhouse gas emissions, vehicle miles traveled, other indicators. So those are really the 3 primary pieces of information that the board will consider as they deliberate through this process: comments, the results of the poll, and results of the analysis. One of the things that you'll see, and Bill I think will touch on this a little bit more, is we've already started to receive comments on what we posted on Monday. So we'll be walking through that. So again, we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to see the comments that have been published so far, and the other comments, and Ivy and Matt will be recording comments on those posts on the whiteboards up there. So one of the other piece of information or piece of paper you got when you walked in was initial draft transportation expenditure plan comment log. So these are some of the comments that we've received so far, and again, I won't spend much time on that. I just want to make sure you have that, and if you have a chance to look at that, just skim that as we go through the rest of the agenda here. We'll be bringing this back and gathering more information. One of the primary messages that we want to stress here, and I know I'm going to say it, Bill's going to say it several times, is what we put out Monday is very much a draft. I know there's always the first out the gate kind of sets the tone, and maybe there's some of that, but that wasn't, that's not really our case. We've discussed a lot of different meetings. We need to put something out and start getting comments. We want to hear what you like. We want to hear what you don't like. We want to hear what you don't understand. So again, that'll be part of what Ben will be doing through here. But please don't assume that everything or anything that's in the plan right now is not open to discussion. So we very much want you to see that word draft and recognize it as a draft. So I think that I will just leave it at that and just continue to move through the agenda.
Yes. The next item is public comment, and these are items, I'm not sure why I'm getting that. These are items that are not on the agenda. I have received 2 cards already for agenda items. I'm not sure, there's no marking on Karen Basting. Did you want to talk to an issue unrelated to what's on the agenda. And Ralph, you got to hang tight. Okay.
Okay.
Excuse me. Okay, so Ralph, you gave me this card, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Go right ahead.
My name is Ralph Hoffman. I'm a senior advocate with the Senior Mobility Action Council. We've had a number of pedestrian fatalities and injuries from being hit by cars while legally crossing intersections here in Walnut Creek. I crossed 5 crosswalks safely to get here, partly because I'm wearing a bright colored jacket. Please do your part to make crosswalks safer, especially for senior citizens and disabled people. And we all can then say, way to go, Contra Costa. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ralph. The next card is Karen. Did you want to talk on an agenda item, or? She's right over there. Is this on one of the agenda items?
I think it probably is, yes. It's on the TEP general topic.
Okay, can you wait until we get
Sure.
to that? That would
Absolutely.
be terrific. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else have cards, want to speak to an issue on the agenda that's not on the agenda, excuse me? Okay, then we'll move to close the public comment. Just a there will be obviously an opportunity to discuss the subsequent agenda items and the public to provide some input as well. The next item is approval of the minutes from January 27th meeting. Any additions, deletions, or changes, copies of the summary were up front and are in your packets. Any changes from the EPAC Advisory Committee? None, hearing none. All in favor of approving the minutes from the last meeting, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, Cheryl Brown with Central Labor Council abstains. Okay, thank you very much. The next item of general business is just to bring to your attention in the packet that you have is the EPAC meeting calendar, and that lays out, as Ross indicated, the meetings that are coming up, including the special board meetings, as well as the EPAC meetings themselves. And then there's an action item log on in the packet as well. All of those to date have been completed with the exception of one, I think, that's going to be the subject of discussion this afternoon. So we wanted to bring that to your attention, and if you didn't get one, please make sure you do. Okay, moving on. I want to introduce the first item on the agenda item number 1, which is an introduction to the review of the initial draft TEP. We're going to talk about that first at the highest level so you understand what the document is and what the efforts that are going on are about. We're looking for you to think about issues that are important to you and input that we really are interested in getting from the members of the public, and so that the EPAC can evaluate those as well. Ross is going to talk a little bit about the path forward. At this point, we've had many discussions in small groups since the last EPAC meeting, and we'll continue to do so until the draft TEP needs to go to the board. Ross, you want to?
Well, actually, I think I was a little out of order there. So I've already covered the documents. I didn't have a handout in my hand. So this describes our 3 phases. So we're going to develop the initial draft. We'll be circulating that draft. And then in the green phase, May through July, we'll be seeking approval from the Board of Supervisors and the City Council. So again, I want to thank you all for being here. As Ben mentioned, there's been a series of meetings, small group of members of EPAC, other folks outside of the EPAC, one-on-one groups. So you all should have had some level of conversation with someone on our team about where we are. One just real quick document, again, that's something we can spend a lot of time on today, but something for you to take home and look at and comment on next week. There's a document called CCTA Review of Community Vision Document. So we spent quite a bit of time over the last few meetings talking about the Community Vision Document, and we've shared various iterations of this with different people, incomplete versions of this. So we've tried to fill this out. As we discussed our last meeting, we've been conducting some discussions with the CCTA board. The board's already held a number of special meetings on this topic. So we tried to capture their comments and the outcome of the discussion over these about a half a dozen or so special meetings. So again, it's something you got walking in the door, so please take a look at that. If you have any comments or questions about that, I think the best way to address that might be to email me or call me and we can talk about it. But this is really trying to carry the discussion from the community vision document into the draft TEP. And again, what we really want to do today going forward is get your comments on the draft TEP. And again, we'll be talking about how we'll be doing that through a comment log. So at any rate, again, thank you all for being here. Roll up your sleeves and let's get it done.
Okay, on item 1, the agenda item number 1, are there any public comments? I want to take those first, and then we'll have EPAC discussion. Okay, we want to again encourage you to provide input as we go forward here. You'll have other opportunities, but we're definitely interested in hearing what you have to say. We understand that the document is critically important. Let's move to a public comment on are there any members of the EPAC that want to chime in? On item 1. Yes.
In the item number 1, it says that the presentation of the draft TEP is to be March 29th. I thought it was to be March 9th, the CCTA meeting to that effect.
I'll clarify that. I'll talk about it first in a second.
We're going to, if people in the back didn't hear, we're going to talk about that in a couple minutes.
Actually, it's kind of a scheduled question. So, Kenji, there's 3 meetings in March. So, yeah, you're right. The first, the results of the discussions of these EPAC meetings and other comments that we've heard today will be presented at our next special board meeting, which March 9th is the first one. So you're correct. So there's March 9th, March 16th. And the goal is that we move from what we're calling here as this initial draft TEP that's really a staff consultant product into the draft by March 29th that has the benefit of the board's discussion at those 3 meetings. So that's a good clarifying question. Thank you.
Any other clarifying questions? Okay, hearing none, then we will move on to item 2, which is an overview of the initial draft transportation expenditure plan. At the 16th meeting, the sections of the initial draft TEP were outlined in conceptual terms to introduce it to folks. Bill, to my right here, is going to provide a sort of high-level overview of the and a brief description of those sections, so things are clear and we're all on the same page, which is our hope for this agenda item. Bill?
Okay, thank you, Ben. What my intent here is to do is kind of walk through fairly quickly, but out the draft here, and I'm going to touch on every section of it, and then we'll circle back with comments. What would encourage everybody to do, and I just want to reflect a little bit on the question of versions, so you have an idea what to expect. This is version 1, which, as Ross pointed out, is really a staff consultant draft for discussion. It says right on the top of it. What our current thinking is that we're going to have input from your group first. That's very critical, and the board's looking forward to that. Today, again, is the overview. Next week, I hope we can really get a good documentation of the comments. What we've tentatively committed to the board is that we would reflect this version to the board in their first meeting in March, along with all of the comments that received to date, in particular the comments from EPAC. And then probably just before the second of the 3 meetings in the board, we would actually update the draft to reflect the staff consultant recommendations based on everything we've heard to date. And so that would be the version that the board would be considering at their second and the third meeting, with the idea that at the end of their third meeting, they would release it to the cities for review. This would be the formal release of the draft plan. So I'm saying this because I want to point out there's probably going to be, version 2 would be the one that we probably go out in early March with. Version 3 would be the one that gets sent out to the cities. Version 4 would be the one the board at the end of May adopts. So there's at least 3 more and probably 4. The last one would be the final that they adopt in June if they decide to pursue the ballot measure. So just in that context, I want to emphasize that. Now this is a draft for discussion, and I'm going to just start by going through pretty much page by page. Page 2 is an outline or table of contents. One of the comments that we've already gotten, and I think that we generally agree on, is that whether it's embodied in this document or constantly carried around, is a summary of the goals and principles that were considered by the board and by this group over the last few months. And whether we put it in here, but we're going to carry it with us all the time so that all of you and the board and everybody that's looking at this document can reflect back on what we were all trying to accomplish. So with that, I just wanted to acknowledge that that's a comment we've already gotten. On page 3 is a proposed, this is really starting to be the heart of the plan. This is how we see a potential allocation of dollars, and I'm not going to go into the specifics here. What we did try to do that's a little bit different than Measure J was put the higher priority, bigger projects up towards the top: local streets and roads, BART, and traffic smoothing. Those are the 3 issues that popped up high on the public opinion research and in the public outreach elements of the plan, so we want to emphasize that. Top of the next page are really notes to that table. They're internal to this document. To provide some clarification and some notes for the reader to look at at this version. An example of that is the regional choice category on here is a placeholder. These are dollars that we are asking the regional committees to use. And the idea is that they all in. Some may ask for more bicycle money, some may ask for bike paths, somebody might ask for a particular project, so that the thought process would be blended into the overall plan. Starting on page 5 is the detailed description of funding categories. And this is kind of the heart of the measure. We're recommending a slight increase up to 23%, primarily because of the dire situation we all local governments are facing from the lack of funding to do basic maintenance of the local regional roads. The one thing we're adding a little bit to, it's the second paragraph under one, is potholes, how many roads or miles of road were repaved, things like that. The second category is major streets, complete streets, and traffic signal synchronization. And again, I'm not going to read all these, and as you get into it, and particularly next week, if you've got particular questions, you can let us know. But this is an allocation of about $200 million, which is roughly 9%, I think, of the total measure to the word that was used in the polling and stuff is traffic smoothing, but it's to make life on our arterial roadways better. It is written broadly to allow funds to be used for a whole, aspect of it, lots of different improvements, including bike trails, complete streets, which is a big and important issue these days. And we're actually continuing to talk about this, and we're probably going to, in a next version, talk a little bit about a demonstration project that relates to complete streets, because it's a very important element of the plan. So those that are interested in that, wait for version 2, and I think you'll see some attempt to address that. The third one is another big category, that's BART capacity, access, and parking. Again, this is fairly broadly written, but it is wrapped around better access to and from BART stations for all modes, including, biking, pedestrian, could be last mile shuttles, could be more parking. Really, the onus is on the board ultimately to decide the priority of those dollars. I would call out the fact that, the BART cars is a major issue or a request from the BART district. We've tried to accommodate that by virtue of the kind of conditions, if you will. The last couple sentences in this document talks about some hurdles that we would suggest the board include in the plan, where BART would provide some funds for other improvements that are important to Contra Costa in exchange for Contra Costa making funds available for BART cars. And the biggest condition probably is that this be part of a regional solution. So it's not just Contra Costa, but rather Contra Costa, Alameda, San Francisco, and the region, probably through MTC. The number 4 is basically an extension, albeit whether it's e-BART or BART or bus rapid transit, but it's an extension of the e-BART or the BART extension in East County from the current terminus, which is at Hillcrest Station in Antioch, out towards through Oakley to Brentwood, to a new intermodal station in Brentwood. These are seed monies. One of the things I would point out, and we tried to do this throughout the draft TEP, is include requirements or goals that suggest leveraging of dollars. Contra Costa, the Transportation Authority, has been very, very successful in the past in leveraging dollars, and we want to make sure the public knows that that's one of the mandates here, is that this is intended to be seed money for a project and that seed money, the local money, be used to leverage additional regional, state, or federal dollars. Transit and interchange improvements is number 5, and actually number 5, 6, and 7, I'll just kind of lump those together. High priority throughout Contra Costa is traffic smoothing on the major highway corridors. 5 is the Interstate 80 corridor, 6 is the Interstate 680 corridor, and 7 is and I would note that on the 680 corridor, this would include the Highway 24 corridor as well. We're going to amend that probably in the next version of this to make it clear that that's an eligible corridor. Number 7 talks about the 242 corridor on Highway 4. The intent here is that this is from Concord east, if you will, 242 through Concord and out to East County. One thing I neglected to note, on all 3 of these, there's three words at the end says ramp eligible project. We'll talk more about this a little bit later, but these are projects that would be eligible for an advanced mitigation program, and we'll talk about how the concept behind that in a bit. The Interstate 680 Route 4 interchange number 8 on page 7 is really the example, probably the only pure highway project in this expenditure plan that there's some eligibility in some of these other items, but this one is the one that's actually a project, and that is to finish or the next few phases or next phase of the 684 interchange in Concord. It is, if anybody's driven through there, it's congested every day, and it's a serious problem. 9 is East County Corridor. This is basically written around providing better access from and out of East Contra Costa towards the 580 corridor in Alameda and/or San Joaquin counties. There's a lot of and/ors in here, and the thing I would point out is the selection of the final alternative in this project we are proposing be based on a performance analysis of project alternatives, and we're proposing to write right into this measure, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, that any project over some threshold, we're currently thinking $25 million, would be subject to a performance evaluation of greenhouse gas, VMT, basically all of the core issues that are really in the forefront today in terms of issues that drive alternative selections. We also built into that, or suggesting we build into that one, some protections about growth inducement in areas outside of the existing urban limit lines as they exist today, not future lines, but basically saying for these corridors, whichever one ultimately would be selected, measures need to be embedded into the project and in the approval process that would basically make the roads, if whichever one accomplish the overarching goal, which is provide the connectivity, but not to access to new development or not access that would be considered growth inducing. And we can talk about that. I assume this one might have a few questions or concerns. The advanced mitigation program is the one I mentioned before. The dollars amounts in here say to be determined, and this is really, there will be dollars in the final plan, and what it'll be is some percentage of the capital dollars in those projects where it says ramp eligible. So I noted that I think it was 5, 6, and 7 are all ramp eligible projects. So I don't know the exact percentage at this point. Ross is kind of point on this issue, but there will be a percentage that we'll take off of the capital and put into this corridor. So it'll be a zero sum in terms of dollars, but it's intended to be a new program. It's been successful in a few other counties, and Contra Costa is in the forefront in the Bay Area of trying to put together some demonstration projects around this advanced mitigation. So far, so good? Okay, 11, okay, I'm getting to keep going faster, I guess. Non-rail transit effectively is, for the most part, is bus transportation, but it's written in a way that's performance-based. Again, the idea here is to provide additional dollars for high-capacity transit corridors. CCTA, in consultation with the operators and key stakeholders, would develop some guidelines, performance criteria to, in effect, oversee the implementation of this program. Number 12 is transportation for seniors and people with disabilities. This is a program that, the text here probably needs a little bit of work, because as you read it, you'll see it reads a little bit different than some of these other programs, but the heart of this is the creation of a new mobility management, mobility manager or management program that basically provides overall mobility services for a wide variety of folks. This has been worked on quite a bit by staff and some of the advocates in that community. Top of page 10, Safe Transportation for Children. This is basically a program that was in Measure J, and it's a continuation of that. It's a pool of dollars that can be used on very specific projects that would promote walking and transportation to and from schools, bicycle safety and all that. Number 14 is a category of intercity rail and ferries. In this county, the primary thought is that the Richmond Ferry is up and running, and maybe that's an example. The Hercules station, but there are Amtrak stations and proposed ferry facilities in a variety of cities throughout the county, and this is a reflection of local priorities. Again, CCTA would allocate these dollars based on some performance criteria that's to be determined. The PED bike category, number 15 on page 10, is a continuation of the current program that's in Measure J, and it's augmented slightly. I think that current measure, or the J, had about 1.9%, so this is a 2.6, so it's an augmentation of that program. Language is pretty much the same as it was in J. The item 16 is still an issue that's under consideration, but it's a proposed new grant program of about 6% of the measure. This is so far is been a big issue of discussion between the cities and some of the key stakeholders. It's intended to move towards incentivizing smart growth decisions, if you will, or infill projects and housing around BART and other stations. It's not for housing, it's for the infrastructure that would be necessary to support that. 17, and there's a few programs here. 17 is innovative transportation technology. I think everybody here is aware of CCTA is in a leadership position in terms of technology and smart communities, and this is basically funds for CCTA to use. And there's 3 different programs built up in here that you can read about. Ross can answer more questions about this as we get into it. And then the last, 18 is basically overall planning, transportation planning. It's part of what CCTA's core mission is in terms of a congestion management agency and providing some planning for the future. 19 is what I mentioned earlier, the regional choice program. It's simply it's a category, it's a placeholder category at this point in time. And then 20 is administration. So that really is the allocation of all the dollars, at least in staff's current proposal. The next section, and I'm going to skip over these real quickly because they really all under growth management and urban limit line, we've simply reflected what's in current Measure J, but I would acknowledge, and Ross I'm sure will too, this is work in progress. Staff very much understands that at minimum the growth management program needs to be updated to reflect current practices, and there's some practices in terms of level of service versus other methodology of measuring traffic, but there's also suggestions that we've heard from this group and others about basically more disclosure at minimum of some of the good things that local agencies are doing in terms of hillside ordinances and various things like that. And I think we're very much in favor, I think, at least at the staff consultant level, of proposing some additions to what effectively is a checklist of the communities as the growth management program is a requirement that's tied to return to source. And so there's some requirements, but we're actually going to suggest, I think, over time some additional disclosure of some of the things that are being done locally. The ULL is embedded in this on bottom of page 15. There's a requirement as a part of the growth management program that every jurisdiction, and this was in Measure J, basically have a urban limit line. And there's 2 ways of doing it. You can read about that in here, but this area is very much a work in progress. And I would acknowledge that we've heard a lot from a lot of stakeholders on this, on both sides of the issue. But I think at minimum, there's room in this area. This document was written in 2004 prospectively, and it was before the urban limit lines were done. So at this point, every community does have an urban limit line, whether they adopted the counties or they adopted their own. And there's a need to, at minimum, reflect the current reality. In other words, what communities have. And so this will be an ongoing discussion. On page 21 is a proposed new complete streets policy, and again, I would say this is continuing to evolve. It's a work in progress. It's a placeholder here, but there will be effectively a chapter or an appendix in this document that talks about complete streets. I've already talked about on page 23, there's this Regional Advanced Mitigation Program. Again, that's a placeholder. I think where you'll see the revisions to this is in the area of demonstration projects, and Ross will be prepared either today or next week to talk a bit more about this. The last two sections of this thing, and I'll go real quickly, is governing structure on page 24 and implementing guidelines on page 27. Governing structure, the prior measure didn't have a lot in it about governance, for example, and we kind of, I think, collectively agree that that ought to be included in this measure. Probably the biggest change in this section right now is the proposed Citizens Oversight Committee. It's significantly enhanced in our recommendations to reflect the fact that we're talking about a second half-cent sales tax, and one of the comments we've heard from a lot of, all sides really, is more accountability, more oversight, and this is, there's a lot of detail in here, but some version of this I think will be written into the new measure. And lastly, the whole section on implementation guidelines, I don't want to go through a lot of this, but you can look at it. There are a couple sections that I'd call to your attention. On page 29, we're proposing a new performance-based review. And the thought here is, we use the word 25 million, but the idea was to develop a process by which the CCTA is required prior to final selection of an alternative in a project, and some of those projects were defined earlier in terms of the measure, how the various alternatives rank with respect to greenhouse gases, VMT, and other factors. So it's intended to be a proactive disclosure process to engage the public in that process. And the rest of it, we've talked about advanced mitigation already, complete streets, and there's a lot of sections in here. And again, that's a big overview, or a quick overview of the whole plan. What today we would like, I think, to the degree that possible, and Ben will facilitate this, is questions, clarifications on all of this. And at least my hope would be is that next week you come in with some very specific questions, comments that you want as a group, ideally, for us to pass on to the board in the form of recommended changes, additions, modifications. So that's a real quick overview.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Can you hear me in the back? Okay? Okay, got nodding heads. Good. Well, let's start with members of the public. Are there representatives from the public who want to speak or have questions on this issue? Everything was perfectly clear from Bill. No comments? Okay. Well, we can open it up to the EPAC then for discussion on any of these topics, or the status of them, or clarification, or things around the timeline. Members of the EPAC, comments? Yes, please.
It would, for those of us who are not as familiar with Measure J,
Best thing is an anvil, so.
so I was wondering if next week we could look at your list of expenditures, but make note where it's already in Measure J versus something that's new.
Okay.
You sort of mentioned that in your comments, but it would be helpful to see it written down. And then what that change in expenditure, if there is one, or if it's staying the same, would be helpful to know.
Yeah, it's a little bit to that. So what Bill just did is intended to be just a quick overview, and we want to go through each item by item. So remind me to do that. I think we can answer a lot of that, walking through it, but we'll bring it in next week as well.
Okay.
So you'll get a chance to see what's changed and what's different specifically. Yeah. Okay. Other questions or comments? Yeah, please.
Yeah, so is this the time where you want to talk specifics about these various funding buckets, or is that saved for another time? What exactly are we doing right now? That's my question.
What I'd like to do right now is just get some general comments about the overall framework, et cetera. Item 3 is we're going to walk through each item line by line.
Okay, so we're not in item 3 yet.
No.
Okay, well then I'll make a general comment. I think you guys have done a great job in putting this together as an initial draft, and I look forward to helping you guys revise this for the future.
Great, thank you very much. Over here.
So if I'm understanding correctly, then the changes that have been proposed and discussed in smaller group discussions will be integrated into the next version of this, which will be seen at next week's EPAC meeting, or?
No,
So, one of the handouts you got, as you walked in, initial draft, TEP comment log. So these are some of the comments we've heard. So we'd like, the next two items, items 3 and 4, will be to continue to capture your comments. And then, we're gonna treat it, at least for the next couple of weeks, kind of like an environmental document. We give us comments, and we're gonna try to respond to them, and ultimately, the resolution column will be to say, yeah, staff's gonna include that as a recommendation to the board.
So then this comment log then is intended to reflect all the comments received so far, or only some of them?
Tell us if we missed them, please.
Okay.
Yeah. The intent is yes, whether we've done that, you'll have to tell me. We tried.
Yes, we made a great effort. Another question in the back?
Yeah, just a comment, and this may be something that you're going to cover in the future, but can you kind of tell us the process by which the comments that you hear from the EPAC committee or members versus the comments that you have from this initial draft from the CCTA board versus the RTPs, and how that will influence the next draft that we have? I mean, I understand that not all of our comments and suggestions are going to be adopted, so maybe you could kind of talk through the process of what happens when we, either as a group or individually or in the subgroups that have had ongoing discussions, make a comment, how that will be discussed, and then how the further drafts will be initiated.
Yeah, so believe it or not, we've heard from a lot of people, including folks on our board, and ultimately this, and we don't have anything. Actually, we have one document that shows us how we got here. That was the one I talked about, which was taking the point of the community vision and walking it through the board. But yeah, the two primary documents that I think we want to have now is the draft and these comment logs. And you know, I can't tell you exactly how we're going to do this. We're going to have to take, I got a comment that says take a hard left, and a comment that says take a hard right, and we're going to have to discuss it and make a recommendation among staff and consultants, and ultimately our board is going to say you guys picked the right one, you picked the wrong.
Yeah, just to clarify, I'm not looking for specifics as to how you're going to make that decision, just so that we as an EPAC understand that just because we make a suggestion doesn't mean it's going to be adopted.
Yeah.
That's just so we can set expectations for our, I mean, I know that you will take under consideration things that we comment and ask to be changed or whatever, but just to manage our own expectations, you know, that not everything, just because we comment or suggest it, will be included in the next iteration of the draft.
Well, and I think I can say that the comments that were not adopted are still available to the board and for their consideration when they make a decision. Yes.
And I suppose the comments that don't appear in the next version will also receive an explanation as to why they didn't.
yes.
I think that's the purpose of that document.
That resolution column, or yeah.
That was comment.
Yes, please, Ron.
First, I want to acknowledge the difficulty of this process of putting this all together and the myriad of input sources that must be coming into your offices with different ideas and approaches. I was interested to receive this latest draft, and I was glad to see that there's been a couple of items that were added that are a reflection of some of the suggestions that have been made about possible ways of helping to incentivize infill as a piece of this. My and is I was also somewhat disappointed by what at this point in this package is a lack. And it's a lack of one of two things. And I recognize that we're wanting to be really careful about not locking ourselves into specifically stating each and every project that will be funded here, because there are things that will happen from science and technology and change in the next couple of years that we don't want to be locked into certain expenditures for projects that aren't relevant any longer, or that there are newer or better ways of approaching it. However, having said that, there also is a lack of, and there is a lack of those projects in specific programs with this package at this point. The counterpoint to that, if we don't have a list of specific projects and programs, what I find kind of missing here is the very specific kind of criteria, guidelines or goals, whatever you wish to call them, that would be the agreed upon criteria upon which any future expenditures for projects or programs would be made. And so without one of the two of those things, really what we're only looking at is approving some very broadly stated language for certain types of things without real clear knowledge about where the money is going. And I'm not sure that's the detailed transparency that the electorate might be looking for. And I guess my last comment is, again, I appreciate the difficulty in defining all of the policies and how do we approach them and in what order. But at this stage of the game for us in late March, beginning of April, or excuse me, late February, beginning of March, virtually here, the fact that we're looking at language in the, on the policies that is still the Measure J language from 2004, without reflecting any of the incremental changes, suggestions, concepts, ideas that have been brought forth already, feels like we're really lagging behind preparing ourselves for a vibrant discussion of those policies and kind of decisions about what those new policies might be. So, congratulations, but there's still a lot to do.
Yes.
Ryan, I think your first two comments are captured in the law, and we heard that, so I'm gathering additional information about projects. We gotta figure out the criteria. The second comment says further define performance metrics, and they can that's criteria. Hopefully I captured your comment. And your last comment, this is Ben and I are really going to be talking about it here in the meeting too. We want to make sure we capture your comment. I think you've introduced a new comment that the policy definitions for certain, at least EMP and ULL should be further defined at the stage of the game. We need to get the code changes introduced quickly. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Please.
So, I wanted to comment that the language does need some working on the accessible transportation, but is beautiful. Great job. Thank you. Really, seriously. It's better than I could have hoped for. I will reserve my comments, I think, about percentages for a later discussion. But I will say that I can also help with defining some of those percentages and work on some of the language if it needs to go further. But really just want to say thank you. Phenomenal job.
Thank you. Other comments on this item? No? Okay, let's move on then. We're on agenda item 3. TEP allocation to projects and programs, and so this is where we can talk about some of that detail that was just mentioned. Ross is going to provide a description of the list of studies, that include the list of studies, and I think you're going to talk a little bit about 680.
Yeah, so let's get into it here. I think that's why you guys are here. So Bill covered these categories in more detail than you may thought, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time and ask if this is a chance we're going to walk around line for line. So grab your version, turn to page 5, and what we want to do again is item 1, local street names and touring. Bill said similar to this
Head nods.
Are we, say it again, what are we doing? We're going through each one through? Yes. Okay.
We're not trying to box anything in, but we gotta find some. So, if you think it relates to this, say it. But again, what we're really trying to do is it good? Is it close? Are you way up north? Let us know. But I think there's a general consensus, everybody thinks this is a necessary component.
Yeah.
Let me disagree with that statement. And somewhere 20 to 25% is about the funding that will give it that. And any other comments you want
I have more general ones, but I'll say to that I'm looking forward to the discussion at the CCTA Commission to see how they'll reconcile their original idea to have an incremental return to source incentivized and what is now part of the package as a community development incentive program. So while they had agreed as the commissioners to 18% with a potential 5% increase to 23, I look forward to the resolution of that.
So this is an important point. So what Joel's referring to is a discussion is in the matrix we gave it out, I can't recall the specific date that it occurred. There was a proposal that the local streets maintenance improvement funding be funded at about this percent, that a portion of it be administered essentially like Measure J. Each jurisdiction goes through a compliance checklist and gets their funding, but that there is a second component that would be conditioned more towards jurisdictions meeting housing targets or constructing or non-motorized type facilities. So I didn't think I could capture the comment, if you don't mind. The comment that you want to see the comment, you want to see how it's going to be discussed at the CCTA board meeting. So how do we write it down as, would you like to see a portion of it?
Yeah.
What does it say?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we
I
need.
accept.
Yeah, I agree with Ross. We need specifics. I mean, unless this group doesn't want to talk about it, I think if a subset of EPAC or all of EPAC feels strongly about something, we need to be able to reflect that, because one of our goals, and we owe it to all of you to reflect your comments. And if that's a comment even from a minority of EPAC, I think it's better to state it that way than it would be to say.
Great, then my comment is to have a base level of return to source with an increment above for the jurisdictions that show demonstrated progress towards meeting their housing goals.
Okay.
And I just want to add to that, because I think that we have to remember that the current Measure J is already providing 18% for this very purpose. So the 23% suggested here is on top of that existing 18%. And so the idea was, how do we take some portion of this and consider whether or not that can be utilized, should be utilized for helping to incentivize some of the infill development that has been difficult to get actually coming out of the ground. Or should we just put that aside and try and capture that incentivization in some of the other buckets of money and go with the increased 23% at this point?
Okay. Thanks, Ron. Other comments from the EPAC on this particular one? Ross, you want to keep going through?
And I think Bill, let's move on to item 2 here. Bill said this kind of big category to cover a lot of different types of purposes, these streets, traffic synchronization, and a lot of solutions. We already have a comment, I think it relates to Ron's comment, it's a category one where credit for additional specificity and B projects are very clear. I think we've captured that comment. if these funds, for example, if the 300 million goes completely to buy the cars, because as Karen said, the BART measure can't fund acquisition of rolling stock. There's pieces of BART's measure and our measure that could fund the same work. So what you're talking about could be actually included in the BART measure. So those are the kinds of things we're talking about in coordinating.
Fair enough. I just think this question of security is a strategic intervention in a presently impeding weakness of art.
Yes, and it was acknowledged in the public polls, and I've made note of that. It's an eligible issue. I think that's a good one.
So I think kind of towards the stop, some of the significant comments we'd like to have here again, because initially the proposed funding was 125. This version has 300 primarily to help expand the BART fleet. So that would be a general question that I'd get out of this one. Is that a good idea? Should we be investing in BART cars on this measure, or should we be looking at funding those cars from a different measure and using dollars for other purposes in the plan? So that's kind of getting back to your comment about just the look feel of this stuff. Does everybody generally agree we should be including funding for BART cars to expand the BART fleet in here?
Let me make
So I will say that I want to echo what Peter was saying from the lens of getting people out of single cars. I absolutely support this when there's not, in my awareness, another option at this point to fund those cars. And that safety is a huge issue for vulnerable populations, so people who need accessible transportation, and we need to rely on those systems which are the least costly to provide, and I would say that this ranks among them, so that we would have seniors and people with disabilities who are able taking a BART before they would be taking paratransit or something like that. So we need to ensure that there's a sense of safety, and so I just would echo those comments and absolutely do think that this is an appropriate place, particularly given Karen's comments.
Go ahead.
Andrew Field with the Alliance for Jobs had to leave early, but he did mention to me earlier that they had some reluctance in this measure in terms of the use of money for BART cars, but he liked the criteria that's in here and simply said that he wanted more information about it. So I think the comment would be on behalf of the Alliance for Jobs would be that provide some clarity and maybe more information on the criteria that the board would consider in terms of allocating these funds for BART cars. So just, it's something for the record. I want to make sure that his comment was there.
Great, thanks.
Maybe just a question. Sorry.
Where? Okay, well, over here you haven't had a chance. Perfect. Thanks.
Just in terms of information and thinking about access to BART, we've seen a 20% increase on the Iron Horse Trail at the Pleasant Hill BART station from our trail counter in the last 3 years. So people are using regional trails to get to BART as part of their last mile commute. And I think if we were going to work with BART on the rail car piece, we should think about having some provisions in their measure to make it easier for people to get to BART via bike and ped access.
Right, thank you. Joel, did you have something?
Just a general question about some of these other alternative funds, such as, in particular, I guess I should say, the additional on and off-site parking. Do you know what types of percentages, if this didn't go to BART cars, how much would go to these other suggested categories?
There's no specific proposal. This was intended to be permissive in terms of those dollars, but the authority would have to set those priorities. That could be a comment. I mean, if EPAC...
Well, yeah, I guess my comment would be that we would set those priorities before a measure was passed, so that if it was not going to BART cars, that we would know how the money was spent. I think our agreement would be with encouraging station access, safer walking and biking connections, and last mile, first mile kind of issues, rather than on and off-site parking. So it'd be great to see how we're breaking down those in the case that this does not go for BART cars.
And that's a good comment, and what I would encourage you to do is, that, like next week, maybe propose some specific language here, because right now, this is basically general and it's relatively equal in terms of priorities. If EPAC as a group feels that there's a priority should be given to one element of this proposal or another, that we need to hear that. So that's the kind of thing.
Fair enough.
Right? Please.
Just clarification is, so I think it sounds great on the surface that there's cooperation between the BART measure and this one, but I understand it correctly, they're not dependent upon each other, right? So if the BART measure doesn't pass, this allotment of money would still...
Still alive, yes.
Okay, thank you.
They're not tied to in terms of one or the other. One or the other could be on the ballot, they can both be on the ballot, one or the other pass and fail. And that's part of the reason why there is such broad language in here would be I think we've got comments on that one. So item 4 is, most of you probably know, construction is underway to extend BART from current terminus at Bay Point out to Antioch. So this would be to provide some level of funding to either extend BART through the East County and Brentwood, or alternatively, higher capacity transit. So it's really to keep providing service as far as the East County. This also has similar language that if BART were to fund this project in the measure, it could free up dollars to, if BART were to fund this project in their measure, this could free up dollars to help expand BART.
Does the language sound right? Yes.
So I'm just wondering, why is this line item necessary to be taken out of this potential tax measure as opposed to letting BART cover it in their tax proposal?
I'll try it, Karen, and I don't get it right. BART board has, I don't know if it's adopted a policy, but certainly a spoken policy that they want to address the core capacity issues prior to system expansion. Karen, can you have your head, is that adequate statement? That's adequate. So BART's focusing on the maintenance and system upgrade using their power measure, not system expansion.
A quick question about the funding. Do you know, I mean, obviously many of these are leveraged. Do you know what an estimated full cost of an extension would be?
Around 225, 250, this is about a third.
Okay, and without kind of BART's express mission to do extensions at this point, what's the viability of getting that other 2/3 for a BART extension?
Well, probably, if current practice continues, it could depend on what's developed in Brentwood. You know, NTC was a major funding partner on the BART project, and that required Pittsburgh may have to have some TV development around it. Certainly, there was a reason 3 or something like that. I'm sure NTC would.
Okay, so I guess one of the comments that I would make is that I know that there's MTC specific criteria for new transit stations to have density, but I think it should be mirrored in the language here that says that new transit stations will have required minimum densities to support this in order to also receive leveraged money. Otherwise, this looks really infeasible.
The next 3, I'm going to try to lump these together. I'm going to try to lump them together too. These are, so this is 5, which is I-80 corridor, 6 is 680 corridor, and 7 is the But it's really is to use tactics that are used in other parts of the country, other parts of the world, to manage the flow of traffic, to provide better information to travelers on the corridors, to provide ways to significantly improve the use of transit on those corridors. It could be bus transit systems, it could be bus priorities for signals and ramp meters and so forth. So we have certainly have a comment about additional information that is necessary for these projects. I'll just rattle out real quick and I'll bring this information. The I-80 corridor is, that there's a significant study underway led by West Country Costa Transportation Advisory Committee, WICTAC, and it's funding from MDC, and other agencies to fund this study. A lot of different alternatives to that, put in preliminary alternatives. So that is going, that effort is going to extend beyond the completion of the TEP. So we're going to have to think about that one. Clearly, if you're following that project, the intent is front and center towards improving transit. Six is the 680. There's really three major activities underway at CCTA that will help inform this project. We want to first complete the carpool lanes and express lanes that are already under construction and largely designed and almost fully funded. Martin Engelman, who's in the back, a number of our team recently concluded a transit study for this corridor, and that had a lot of interesting recommendations towards improving transit on 680 itself as well as tour, potentially by using shoulders and other technology. And then on Highway 4, I always talk about Highway 4 kind of like the Golden Gate Bridge. Way back at the beginning of Measure C, we started work on Highway 4 by lowering Willow Pass and slowly built it up to the end, and it's built now. Now it's kind of like the bridge. We painted the bridge, now we've got to come back and touch it up a little bit and repaint it. We're not repainting it, but widening it. We have two projects underway. One is it's called Integrated Corridor Mobility, which really is more about managing, about having interagency management of all the transportation assets out there, BART, all the local roads, et cetera. And then we have a second study to address the choke point at Willow Pass. That's really starting to really hurt traffic right now. Potentially there, one alternative that's starting to promise would be to put additional carpool lane on the shoulder of Highway 4 over the Willow Pass. So again, those are studies that are all underway. I can bring additional definition on that.
Okay, comments on that group? Yes.
Well, I think this underscores a lot of what Terry and Tim were saying earlier on the item number 3 for the East, item number 4, East County BART extension. I think it's fairly obvious that if you increase ridership in East County, at least during commute times, that in and of itself will help abate some of the issues on Highway 4, right? And I guess my first comment is that getting back to item number 4, that's one of the items that seemed a little low to me, just on appearance. And I guess my comment to Tim's question would be, I'm happy to see it differentiated from the rest of BART because I think that's important. It also occurs to me that because there's an inverse relationship between item number 4 and item number 7, yes, and item number 7, if you gain greater efficiencies in one, there really is no way that one could help make the other more efficient in a monetary sense. Is that correct?
Yes. The more passengers are carried on board, the less they have inflation.
Right.
Yeah, so I think those are good comments, and I think what you're asking and what we're working on is look at those two relative numbers and see if the scope and the funding levels really make sense.
Well, yes. I mean, you could possibly, I guess, have a dangerous situation where you have BART competing with the people that build roads. It's a whole different use, and I understand that. Yeah, I guess my comment would be, I guess I would have to agree with that, and I guess I would go by my initial comment that it seemed to me that number 4 looked a little on the low side, especially based on your comment that it's 1/3 of an extension. And my final comment is E-BART is wonderful, and it's a boon to that part of the county where I don't reside, so I don't have a dog on the porch. But a lot of my friends are in that commute lane every day, and I would hate to see E-BART's a little bit of a weak sister to me for a link. I mean, that has yet to be determined. We have to see how efficient it's going to be and how ridership is and what the experience will be like. But it just strikes me that we could be painting ourselves into a corner to extend it even deeper if it's not all that I hope it is in the beginning. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Bill had a comment in an earlier version that we should be looking at alternatives before we fund this project. Maybe that comment needs to come back.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else on this side here? Yeah, please, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to like to repeat a comment that I made at our meeting on Tuesday with the small group, especially in relation to item 6. This is the 680 number, just that we find this significantly lower than we had hoped for. I'd like to say that closer to 200, like I said on Tuesday. Observing that commute times are one of the bigger issues for a lot of our members, and this. With our two, major goals or major criteria for this measure being 1, that it, reduce congestion, especially commute times, and 2, that actually be passed. We think it's important to increase that number significantly on 680.
So that's 6. 6.
6.
Yeah, okay, got it. Other clarifying questions or add? Yeah, Joel?
Like I said, I'm going to make, I think at the end, a few general comments, but I just wanted to call out kind of a general thing about the kind of corridor type approach, which is ultimately that I think it's a big concern that they are so open-ended at this point. It'd be nice to see more specificity, and I think that could come in a variety of different ways. One, more specificity about what are voters being asked to do from these final studies? So if there is a final recommendation, what is the final recommendation? What is the voter actually going to put themselves up to? Because they all say that they're based on performance analysis. Those performance analysis criteria are non-binding. And so without a final selected project, I think it's really important that voters know what are the types of activities. I mean, Ross, I'm really happy to hear, the variety of things, carpool lanes, whatever kinds of, bus rapid transit that's in there. And for what it's worth, of course, this is a draft, but I think as it becomes more refined, as it stands right now, there's about 20% of the measure that's undefined at the low end. And so I think that's a concern without really strong performance criteria. So on the one hand, it's clearer and more definitive project listing so that people know what to expect and how are those things going to be performed. So it's also the project criteria that can give voters the understanding of how are these going to actually alleviate and reduce congestion, how are they actually going to meet the targets that they want and make their lives better. So I think that's kind of a general corridor type of comment. No specific specificities about numbers or anything.
All right. other comments? Did you have one? Go ahead.
Uh,
Can you speak right into the mic? Yeah, or pull it forward. That'd be great.
This may be indiscreet, and it represents a very general consideration. I realize it doesn't cover everything, but in general, my own angle coming from the, let's call it the transformation side, wanting to shift population out of private cars, decongest the roadway as much as we can. I don't think you want to do things which lay the groundwork and support greater population in the eastern part of the county. In other words, the interest of the developers in that part of the county should not march through without being challenged. Eastern part of the county basically means sprawl. Sprawl means cars. Cars means congestion coming down into the western part of the central and western part of the counties. So for everything, including the BART extensions out there, I think there should be a question mark as to their relationship to encouraging or discouraging the sort of development that the county, in my view, really doesn't want.
Thank you. Any other comments on this group? No? Okay, why don't we move on?
Overall, totally modernizing interchange is about $4 million project, so we're not proposing that we do that in this measure. This would fund the first phase of the project, which is largely design, invite Highway 4 from 2 to 3 lanes each direction through the interchange, but basically what that is a safety and operations project. If you go through those features of the short, it's just a hazardous situation. So that would fund that first project and provide some funds to study the future phases.
Everybody okay with that one? Thumbs up.
Okay, take a breath. 9, East County corridor. I'm sure we do have some comments on that. Somewhere. They're up to it, and probably know what the captain's records. Need more information about scope and cost and how to present this project would be road producing. Probably more to that comment. And again, I'd like to hear comments about the concerns for the project, the need for the project, and is this an appropriate relative to the amount of funding dedicated to the project Who wants to go?
Kristen.
Hi, good afternoon. Sorry I couldn't be here sooner. I was glad Josh could be here for us. Certainly the East Bay Leadership Council has looked at this, this particular part of the corridor. I've talked about it a lot through the EPAC process. We're glad to see it's here. We think it's important. There is an existing, I think that there is certainly a way to get to something that will not cause undue burden. It will not induce growth in ways that are inappropriate. I mean, there's a lot of people who commute from the eastern Contra Costa into eastern Alameda, and it would be terrific to improve on those connections. It's something that we need to take seriously. It's a safety problem. We need to do better by that part of the region, and I think this is an important investment to make. So we're glad to see it's here, and we'll continue to spend some time thinking about this and advocating for it.
Thanks. Other comments? Yes, here.
I apologize for being slow on the draw, but back to number 8, just real quick, that we've all been through this before, and the tendency is that the lower price tag items tend to be the ones that are the low-hanging fruit when things that can't get done don't get done. And so I would just echo Ross's comments that that is a hazardous interchange there, and if we don't do phase 1, we'll never do phase 2. So not questioning the amount, but just the priority, and since it is one of the smaller price tags, just to make sure that it maintains a high priority.
Thank you. Other comments on 9 or 8? Ron, sorry, and then Joel.
Yeah, I have a number of comments, some of which, Ross, you already alluded to, the kind of the beginning of the framing of some of the issues. First, I want to suggest that I'm prepared to stipulate that East County has a cul-de-sac problem, and the backdoor route is not an unimportant subject for us to be considering how to relieve. And over the course of the years that this project has been around, it's been promoted as and talked about as the necessary for goods movement, economic vitality, particularly from the northern waterfront, and how to link to the Central Valley and transport of goods. And those are certainly all vital and important, critical goals for us to have, and I share in. The however on this is, and I read this in an East County publication recently, that this has been a 50-year project. This has been hanging out, and by golly, it's time for us to do it. And my perspective on it is that in 50 years, a lot has changed. And I don't want to begin to go into how much has changed. But one of the things, the bottom lines of that is, enough has changed that this roadway project that's been around for 50 years may have passed its time. There may be other ways to go about doing this. There is an existing Byron Highway that might be looked at as a far cheaper alternative for how to make improvements there to move goods. There are some existing rail lines that might be utilized, particularly linking up with what's being talked about on the northern waterfront in terms of rail there. But then if we get into the specifics of this project, just recently, I guess some additional materials have been added to the website, or I've only recently become aware of them and have just begun to do some initial evaluation of it. But this entire project is projected to have a cost of over $1 billion. And to my understanding, Caltrans is not interested in participating in any new road building construction at this point. And I don't know that Alameda or San Joaquin counties are interested in participating. And so I'm just curious, if we have $117 million going to this project towards $1 billion project, where's the rest of the money coming from? Certainly not in the next 10-year or 20-year time horizon, which is what this measure is attempting to do. And I guess one of the other numbers that quickly jumped out at me on the chart of expenditures for that project is, out of the $1 billion, environmental mitigation alone is projected to be $118 million. This measure is projecting $117 million as the allocation. So I just don't know that the numbers make sense, or that this is the best possible way, or enough of the answers aren't provided for us at this point. And I'd really want to have further conversation about the appropriateness of including this item.
Okay. Did you get that down?
He'll submit it, right? Yeah. No, I got a lot.
And we want to keep moving here. So,
Okay.
Joe, go ahead.
I'm going to start with a comment that I'd like submitted from the editorial board of the Contra Costa Times. Quote, "We must motivate people to share rides, take public transit, and live closer to jobs. Building more freeways is not realistic right now. We must better use those we have." End quote. I could quote more from that article. It was an editorial that came out shortly ago and shows the clear priorities of, I believe, people in the entire region and throughout the entire state, that highway expansions at this time is not only infeasible, but it's politically unacceptable. There's no money coming from MTC or from the state on this project because it was ranked as one of the lowest in the region on the regional transportation plan. While that being said, also believe the goods movement is very important for East County area. We've heard a lot about the importance of the Northern Waterfront Plan. Likewise, I think that there are many alternatives here that should be considered, and voters should not be just expected to expand a freeway without a very specific project, without a very specific understanding of where that project will be located. And in addition to that, not only is Alameda not necessarily going to pony up some money, but there are elected officials in Alameda County that would never stomach commuters being dumped into one of the worst possible commutes in the entire country, which is the Tri-Valley 580 commute. If you ask people in Tracy whether or not that they would want to sit in more traffic from Brentwood. That's an insane proposition. So this is a project that, until further defined, needs serious reconsideration. And if it's about goods movement, let's say goods movement. The words goods movement don't end up in this TEP a single time. And so we need to have a clear understanding what's the outcome, what is it going to be funded for and by, and how are we going to arrive at a viable project that can suit that. Now, I'm also going to give comments from one of the other coalition members in our group that said that essentially at this point the TEP is at a worst case scenario, and what we have right now is a wide variety of things that will not meet the regional standards and won't meet the standards that will achieve our VMT and greenhouse gas emissions that comes from Transform. So they're going to provide more comments next week, and they've weighed in over the years many times on SR 239 issue. So it's something that I think can entertain a very interesting and opportunity to talk about goods movement in a way that does not have growth-inducing impacts. As stated right now, the project is wildly out of anything that should be funded by this.
Okay, thanks, Joel. Any other comments on this one? Okay. Bob, I'm sorry.
Well, far be it from me to counter the oracle that is the Contra Costa Times, but I just want to remind you that there are some things that freeways are spectacularly good for. And I can't answer exactly where they should put them and so forth. There's certainly mitigation issues whenever you do anything, and they should absolutely be addressed. But I think we can't deny that not everyone can ride share and carpool and the reality is our freeways are underutilized except for commute times where they are significantly overutilized. And I think when we look at freeways, we forget how much commerce travels on freeways. We tend to think of the commuter and the guy like me trying to get here and arriving late. I think in many cases there's commerce, there's trucks and so forth. Goods are being delivered. They're the blood veins of the economy.
Thank you.
Editorialize a little bit. I agree on the statement. If airlines manage an airline fleet, like we manage our freeways, they've got business. They always have somebody in the seat. They can't put people on them that don't. That's what some of these projects are trying to do, spread that.
I would also add, as a former Contra Costa Times reporter and columnist, that the Contra Costa Times editorial board consists of one guy. So, who's great. He's a great guy, but, he is one guy, so.
Okay, this is helpful.
Let's go one more topic here, and then we'll see where we are. This kind of ties together some of the first section. Item 10 is a program that clearly needs a lot more definition, advanced mitigation program. And the reason that it's shown as funded TBD, the projects, primarily the projects above this, listed above this, consist of capital construction projects that are likely to have one or more likely to
Lonnie Schukel, John Muir Land Trust. With respect, I respectfully had the question, what is the best venue for shaping advanced mitigation programs? So would submit John Muir Land Trust would like to participate in that steering committee. Great, thank you, appreciate it. And with respect to specificity now, could cite a few things and hand them off as written document, but I'm sure they'll come out over time within the steering committee. But just briefly, if proposed mitigation is in the form of land acquisition, it must result in the addition of new lands, providing a net gain. For example, previously conserved lands wouldn't qualify as essentially inventory. If lands cannot be found within the vicinity of the impact, we'd propose that greater acreage throughout all of Contra Costa County may be considered further from the impacted area. And again, also mindful of the large landscape and watershed kinds of solutions. Entities and organizations participating in the mitigation programs would need to meet certain qualifications, including approval by CDFW to hold mitigation lands, along with national accreditation and the like. And that any mitigation measures must preserve key open space of reasonably equivalent quality and character, regarding conservation values, soil quality, terrain, etc., that would otherwise be threatened by development and or other urban use. So that said, I know this is going to come out within the steering committee. I appreciate your time. Thanks.
Okay, we're at item number 11. I think what we want to try to do is just have Bill go quickly through some of the policy areas. You've got the sense of the type of questions and the comments and the input that we're looking for, so you can be looking at that through the rest of these. If there's someone who has a real desire on one of them that's in here to talk, we'll entertain that, but it is almost 5 to 4, so I wanted to get this policy issue framed for you to think about in the coming week in anticipation of bringing more comments on the 3rd, if that's is that okay. We can entertain that question too, if people want to stick around longer. You want to go 15 minutes and no? Okay, well, again, as I said, we would hope that from the types of questions and types of inquiries that have been made today, we're looking for the same type of thing for the other ones. But I would like Bill to have an opportunity to talk. I'm sorry. I would like Bill to have an opportunity to talk about the policy areas. So we can at least frame that, and if there's any quick questions, we'll do that.
If I may, I mean, if that's going to essentially carry the discussion to the next time and we're not going to have a discussion, it'd be great to have final thoughts and clarity on this, close it up, and then just introduce policies at the next meeting.
So, I'm sorry.
You ready?
Yeah. So we're okay in going with the policy areas right now?
This will be real quick. Well, do you, Ron, if we got questions still on the project program side, we should entertain those. But
yeah, that's what we're trying to do.
We acknowledge that. In fact, I went through this growth all the policies very quickly before, and I would just say very quickly, if you've got comments, be prepared to talk next week. We'll put a priority on that. But we already acknowledge that both growth management and urban limit line deserve some additional discussion. Ross and I are going to have to come up with something, but I'm not sure what we're going to have next week. But we'll frame a discussion around issues that we are well aware of and that are pretty much articulated in the community vision document that a lot of you have participated in putting together. So
I guess what I meant was, are we going to pick up at number 11 next Thursday and then just carry the policy discussion over? Or are we going to have any opportunities to have wrap-up comments at this point?
We need to
cover the rest of the projects that we ran out of time. So if you have,
Great, thank you.
Bill said, I think you got the tone of the kind of things we're looking for. If you could take a few minutes and give us your thoughts, any of the project programs we discussed or the ones we did not discuss, just email me and
And we will reflect and summarize those next week and make sure that we've captured it correctly. So not to think that we're not going to be open.
I'm not sure. Did you just say that we weren't going to go over the rest of these things? I'm sorry.
I think to help accelerate that, if you could take time to provide comments, and we could.
Prior to.
The question.
Okay.
Yeah, this is, I mean, we know you just saw this for the first time Monday. I think Cheryl's asking you what we're trying to get at. You can provide, take a few minutes and send me an email.
Okay. So we've got 15 minutes apparently with this facility. But then there's another event here, so we have to get out of here kind of quick. So if people are okay with just extending this a little bit longer, so we can get through a couple of these policy items, and they're important discussions that we want to have.
Well, and I think there's some comments left on our projects and programs that Cheryl's anxious to comment, and I think we should do that. On the, if people, again, on the policy issues, just send Ross or I or both of us an email, and we will prioritize it for discussion next week. But on the projects and programs, I know that we're at a couple big ones here. The non-rail transit bus program, and we would like some comments if there are any. And Debbie had started to hint on the dollar allocation to 12. So.
Well, then we'll go ahead with 11.
Well, Ross, I don't know if you want to summarize this, but either one of us, the issue of non-rail transit,
We'll just open it up. Are there any burning questions on 11 through 20?
Yes, there's a good way.
Cheryl.
Yeah, so number 11, non-rail transit. I think this is a category where we would like to see a commitment, greater commitment and investment in bus service. As written, it's really unclear as to what this funds, and it doesn't seem that it would help people who use or would use bus service in the county. It doesn't appear to allow to open new routes to get to from one part of the county from another, and even within one part of the county, investment is inadequate to get to the frequency levels that are needed. I think it could take, I heard today, 4 hours to get from Richmond to Martinez on the bus with an hour-and-a-half layover. So what we're looking for is solutions to that kind of inconvenience to bus riders that really, we would like to see a message from the CCTA that is not what it appears to be now, which is your time isn't as valuable as the time of drivers and BART riders. So, bus service we see as being something that's going to continue to be extremely important in the future, and we want to see that expanded through this half-cent sales tax. If you want a number, we'd say we want to double this category and really pull out operations for bus service. And I really have some questions about what the category non-rail transit refers to. It's not BART. Doesn't seem to be ferry because that's funded in a separate category. So what is this? Contra Costa already has 4 bus operators. I don't think we need any more. The trend is regionally to have discussions about consolidation, not creating more operators that are outside of the current service system. We know riders like to have connectivity between one mode of transit to another. So I think we have the questions around the governance piece or the performance criteria of this that seems to pull out bus operators, but not the other very nebulous things that are pointed to in this. In terms of guidelines and criterion performance measurements, we like that, but we think that it shouldn't be so strict on bus operators and not on other things that are being funded in this whole measure. So we'll speak more to governance at a later time. But really to sum it up, it just does not appear that there's the commitment that we would like to see towards bus operations in this county.
Okay.
Any other burning comments on project
Just want to point out that the key priority projects in some cities are overcrossings over major roads and even highways. Those are very expensive, as you know. They have the multi-benefit of safety for the pedestrians and the bicyclists that want to cross, and then also they improve traffic smoothing below, so there's less GHG emissions. And I can probably list 4 projects alone that would cover about 80% of what's allocated here. I recognize that we're looking at matching money from cap and trade and from maybe Plan Bay Area and obviously the Park District's own funding, but just want to point out that is a real good way to get viable greenhouse gas reduction by promoting transit via the regional paved trails network that connects communities together, not just within one community.
Thanks.
I had a question here.
Ron.
I may have missed it, but for this category, is there a list of the projects that are being included or considered as part of what would be accomplished by this?
One of the comments we got, and I think it was maybe written down wrong, is the define the total cost and kind of like, I don't know, Brad here, kind of like bicycle plan, trail plan. So there's a list. I mean, there's a defined list now. This level of funding would then come nowhere near funding the entire thing. So what's traditionally happened is that this is managed on a pay-as-you-go basis. So every 4 or 5 years, you go through a process to prioritize the next round of projects that can be fit in the funding.
So my question goes to who's making those priority decisions and what do we know that we're funding out of this measure or potentially funding out of this measure? I saw a recommendation for, was it 1/3 to East Bay Regional Park District, but that leaves 2/3 unclear as to, again, my original thing, either a list of the specific projects or the kind of criteria that trails and projects would have to achieve.
Ron, it does refer to the second line in that category to fund and implement projects in the countywide bicycle and pedestrian plan. So we can find the first answer to that question. We'll find that and provide. And somebody did ask specifically, what's the total in that plan? What it would cost to implement that entire plan? So those are 2 factoids that we can provide. Now, whether that process or the development of that has the right criteria on it or not is for this group to judge, I think.
It's coming over here.
Regarding number 15 for pedestrian, bicycle, and trail facilities, we have a list of potential projects which alone I think would justify doubling this amount to implement. And I just want to echo Sean's comments about the role of trail facilities in facilitating non-motor transportation between communities over longer distances than facilities on streets tend to do, which, as he says, would greatly reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also reduce congestion on roads.
Great.
We're starting to lose people. We need to.
Well, don't lose people before I've spoken.
Absolutely not. Go ahead.
Well, I mentioned it before, so if you're not going to put it away, I will bring up. So just to give you a flavor, because if you look at this section on transportation for seniors and people with disabilities, growing segment of our population and will likely blank over the next blank years. I can tell you that in 2010, 65 and older population in Contra Costa County was 12% of the overall population. In 2040, it is going to be 23% of the overall population. It is a hugely fast-growing population, the 85 and older segment going from 19,000 in 2010 to 54,000 in 2040. That's a big number of people who are at the frail end of the spectrum, and consider you have a 50% chance for Alzheimer's disease in that age group. So half of the 54,000. So I'll be the one taking care of you, so be nice to me in this section. But I will say, the things that we may or may not consider, if you look at the percentage of the population that is aging, they're going to need vastly greater services than those who are not and who can manage their own transportation. We have not considered the needs of the veterans in this community, and it's not like they're going to be able to get services in their communities. We talk about people getting jobs where they live. You can't get a VA where you live. you can't get some of the services and healthcare needs, social care needs, things like that as you age. And given the vastness of this growth, we need to consider a little bit more funding than what we have here. Or a lot more.
Thank you. Others on 11 to 20.
I'll save my further comments for next week.
Okay, thank you.
In the interest of time, I'll go ahead and send our comments on 16 just to reemphasize the need to make sure that it's effective and seeks and achieves the goals. I know it's still in flux.
Great, thank you. Any others? So we're going to prioritize the policy actions for discussion for the 3rd to make sure that that happens. Any other comments from members of the EPAC?
Bill, did you have probably yet have a conclusion of that?
I'll save those for next week too.
The same goes for others, if there's any concluding comments you want to make. So our next meeting is on the 3rd, same time, same location, correct? And we will be assembling these comments into the logs that we've described. And we got several very good comments. We appreciate you taking the time to join us, and we look forward to seeing you on the 3rd. We hope you have time to go through this in more detail and can provide us with further specific comments as we move forward towards putting this together so we can forward it on to the board. Is there any closing comments? You're safe? You're good? Okay, well, thank you all very much. We appreciate your time, and we will see you next week.
I owe you an answer to your question about what's on the horizon.